You're listening to Digging Star Wars, your online journal of the films that inspired George Lucas to create the Star Wars saga. Welcome to Digging Star Wars Episode 10. Today we're going to talk about Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Spielberg's 1977 sci-fi classic, and its connection to Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. What's great about this episode is we were recording this episode in Los Angeles, California, which is very exciting, and my special guest is Scott Prestwood, who will be joining us in just a second. Just to give you a little setup about Close Encounters, for those of you who have not seen the film, it was an early film of Steven Spielberg and helped establish him as pretty much the wonder kid that he is. The film was released in 1977, fall of 1977. He missed the summer deadline, which is kind of ironic because Star Wars owned the summer of 1977, Star Wars A New Hope, that is. It was nominated for several awards, and it lost a lot of them to the original Star Wars. However, it did win an Oscar for cinematography and for sound effects editing. And in 2007, Close Encounters was deemed culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant by the United States Library of Congress and was added to the National Film Registry for preservation. It's made several lists on AFI, including the 64th greatest film of all time, the 31st most heart-pounding film of all time, and the 58th most inspiring. So, not too shabby for a film that was second best in 1977's to the original Star Wars. Perhaps the greatest compliment came from sci-fi master Ray Bradbury, who declared Close Encounters of the Third Kind the greatest science fiction film ever made, which is a arguable statement to say the least. But at any rate, so it's a film worth seeing. Okay, well, before we go any further, I'd like to introduce our guest today, and that is Scott Prestwood. Scott is a longtime friend of mine, and we've worked in video and film productions a lot, to say the least. Scott has scored and edited some of my films, and last year he served as director of photography on a national campaign spot we did, which won a Telly Award, and we're very proud of that. And I'm very, very excited to be out here in Los Angeles with him to record this very special episode, so please welcome Scott Prestwood.
Chris, thanks for having me.
Well, I know, it sounds so formal, right? No, people are listening. They want to hear what you have to say about Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Your initial thoughts on the film.
I've never seen this film.
Oh, it's a good setup. Wait, why? Is there a reason?
Well, when you go back to 1977, 10-year-old Prestwood, you either like Star Wars or you like Close Encounters. You couldn't mix the two.
You couldn't like both?
Not in my small world of elementary politics. It was kind of a version of class warfare. I mean, these Close Encounters kids, well, I got the feeling, their parents were probably a bunch of elitists.
Wow.
And that kind of filtered down to them.
I guess I understand what you're saying about the kids being divided. I think Close Encounters and Star Wars would go together. I understand the differences between the two of them. I'm struggling to see why a kid would want more space movies after seeing Star Wars. And here came Close Encounters from George Lucas's best friend.
Well, for my 10-year-old taste, it didn't look like a space movie. What I really needed was more Star Wars and quick. It just never appealed to me. I mean, not when you've got dogfights in space, Death Star, stormtroopers. Star Wars, it just offered up too much excitement at the time. Close Encounters to me just looked like a trip to Dulles.
Yeah, well, it's very fast-paced, and it's that swashbuckling action. And Close Encounters certainly is not that. Close Encounters is more like a mystery. So I can understand why a 10-year-old kid might not be drawn to Close Encounters, but it's interesting because Ralph McQuarrie did design for both Star Wars. He did the concept art and designed a lot of the spaceships and armor and the stormtroopers and guns and stuff, and he designed the UFOs in Close Encounters. And Dennis Murin did special effects on both, so there are two huge influences on how it visually looked, and mentions on the Wikipedia entry for Close Encounters that McQuarrie painstakingly made sure Encounters did not look like Star Wars. But it was so big and so hyped, and you've had no desire since you were 10 to see this movie?
I also didn't see E.T., And E.T. was nothing, being older was nothing that I wanted to see, and since Spielberg was the one that did that.
I mean, Close Encounters was the follow-up to Jaws.
Oh, I get it.
Out loud.
Yeah.
So, all right, just put things in perspective. Star Wars came out May 1977, and Close Encounters came out November 1977. So, and Star Wars pretty much swallowed up all the awards. Close Encounters got cinematography, and rightfully so. It's a beautifully shot film. And you're a music guy too. I think it's very interesting that John Williams scored both films. He scored the original Star Wars, all the Star Wars films, of course, and he scored Close Encounters. And both were up for Academy Awards, and he won the Academy Award for Star Wars. So, I guess to a 10-year-old, Star Wars wins, and I am not arguing that in the slightest, but I just find it hard to believe you never saw Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
It was just the 10-year-old Prestwood. I mean, he's still in me somewhere. I just could never see the appeal in it.
Even though it won Best Cinematography in 1977.
10-year-old kids don't care about that.
Well, but now, with all your years of experience, I think you'd be like, oh, wow, won an Oscar for how it was shot. I should probably see this movie.
Well, you could be right. I mean, maybe that's why we're here today, huh?
Well, then we got some work to do. So
let's call up Wikipedia.
And no, we're going to watch the movie. You did see Attack of the Clones, correct?
You know I did.
We saw digitally projected. I mean, that was a
great day.
Yeah, it was a great day. So we're going to talk about that film, too. Before we get into all that, you need to watch Close Encounters. So, there's no way around it.
Let's do it.
All right, so this will be interesting. This is the first time for digging Star Wars. So in the meantime, enjoy this clip from a Scott Prestwood original. Give us a minute. We'll be right back. And we're back. You were just listening to an original composition from Scott Prestwood, just a taste of it. And let's get started. All right, so it took us, 13 hours to watch the movie? No, we watched a little bit last night, a little bit this morning. What's your reaction?
My reaction is... I don't know. It was entertaining, right? Lots happened in 40 years.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because the film seemed a lot slower watching it now, and I just think we're used to the pace of storytelling films today. All right, so overall, you're like, or do you hate it? Do you love it? Or is it somewhere in between?
Somewhere in between. I don't think it was any kind of cultural phenomenon, I mean...
Especially in the wake of Star Wars.
Right, yeah, for sure. I mean, I like the mystery aspect of it. I mean, I thought all that was cool. It was just all that kind of 70s kind of anti-government stuff, which, seems just as relevant today,
right.
Really.
How did you like the cinematography?
That was great.
Yeah, I think it's really well
it's
shot.
Zygmunt and his work on The Deer Hunter. I mean, that's one of my favorite films. And, that 70s realism that he was clearly a master at capturing.
It has the trademark slow dolly in on characters looking in awe, almost ad nauseum in this. I really like the way the light was treated with the spaceships and how it's kind of, again, it kind of felt like you were in a slow motion 70s disco with the way the light solar flares and streaks and strobes and combines and blurs. And
watching it, though, I get hung up on other things.
What problems do you have with it?
Well, they were experimenting on that kid.
Yeah. You mean the little boy that goes into the ship?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. I mean,
well, I'm not trying to do a bit here, but I mean that's what aliens would do.
That's what the aliens do. That's what, or at least that's what we believe. I mean, I think that's also slightly debatable because I know critics, or I should say critics, I should say fans of the film, say how Close Encounters kind of redefined the alien movie because prior to this, it goes against the grain of the 50s. Other Red Scare aliens, where the saucers come down and they destroy and attack cities, and all that. And he was working against that grain. I think that's one of the reasons why Ray Bradbury said it was the greatest science fiction film ever made, because it broke that mold. And I guess this might be a great science fiction film in the sense of pure science fiction versus space opera like Star Wars or fantasy, but I think he was trying to say these are nicer aliens, and this is pre-E.T. Now, you mentioned E.T. earlier, and I agree with you. I think E.T. is just too saccharine sweet for my tastes, and that's why I think I like Close Encounters as much as I do, because it's, to your point, there's a kind of little grittiness and a realism to it versus gags. E.T.'s filled with gags, and there's not a lot of gags in this movie.
Gags,
yeah. So you didn't hate it. You don't love it. That's where we stand on that.
Yeah, I mean, the ending just got too bloated for me. I mean, that's what everybody likes, obviously. That's what we're building toward.
Right.
But it just seemed like it got a little bit too heavy-handed for me.
And you didn't see this when you were 10. I know it's hard to kind of think back, when I was 10, how would I have taken this film? But in 1977, in a movie theater where this is larger than life, I think that finale sequence would at least been entertaining, if not blown your mind.
Blow my mind? I don't know.
What do you think?
It was the 70s, but since I was only 10, I wasn't experimenting with drugs. I don't know, seeing that projected young, impressionable mind, maybe we'd be having a different conversation today.
Okay, fair enough. All right, well, let's jump quickly. Before we start comparing it to Attack of the Clones, I wanted to talk a little bit about what crossovers there are between Close Encounters and Star Wars. I know our listeners are interested in the crossover, and there's a couple different things of that era. First off, I already mentioned this, Ralph McQuarrie designed both the whole look of Star Wars, really, based on notes from Lucas, which he created those beautiful paintings which were used to not only shape the film but get the film made. Ralph McQuarrie also was the designer of the spaceships in Close Encounters, and he purposely made them different, which I think's great. There's other small crossovers. Dennis Muren worked on both films as well, Star Wars and Close Encounters. And when Dennis was working on the mothership, he playfully added on the outside of the hull of a ship a toy R2-D2, which is ridiculously out of scale. The model that he built, you can actually see it at the Smithsonian Institution's Air and Space Udvar-Hazy, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly, Udvar-Hazy Annex at Washington Dulles Airport in Chantilly, Virginia. And it's really cool. They actually have a pretty cool display at that, the Annex Museum, because they have the mothership, and then they have all these Star Trek and Star Wars collectibles, display cases, and all this is within the same hangar space as the actual Space Shuttle Enterprise. So it's pretty cool that they're all in the same room. So at any rate, and then we already mentioned how kind of Star Wars stole a lot of awards, not stole, but it won awards in similar categories same categories that Close Encounters was nominated for, mainly the Oscar for score with John Williams. And, that was another thing. What'd you think of the score? Because I know you're giving me a huge thumbs down. Really? This whole film is about music. Like, you're a music guy, and this whole film is about how music is the universal language.
Right, I got it. And I did like that conceptually, but it just seemed like the music itself was kind of leftovers.
Next to Star Wars.
For me,
I know.
It's hard to believe it's even the same guy.
Do you find it hard to believe that this music was nominated for an Academy Award for score in 1977?
I do find that hard to believe.
Really? Okay. Wow. Well, obviously it lost to Star Wars, and rightfully so, because the original Star Wars score is just amazing. It also lost the Hugo Award to Star Wars as well. So that's a little bit of the history, and I know we're paraphrasing here. Like I said before, the Wikipedia entry is very meaty as far as information if you want to read up on it, so I encourage you to go there. Now, let's talk about Attack of the Clones. So I know it's been a while since you've seen Attack of the Clones. Point blank, the connection between the two films is the alien design. So the alien that is in Close Encounters, George Lucas has blatantly said this is the Kaminoan alien, the aliens that make the clones on Kamino. Do you see that? Can you agree with that?
I would agree with that, yes.
Okay. The one thing about it is, like, okay, so the aliens look the same. What else is there? And I think, and we were talking about this between watching the movie and all that when I started comparing the two films, there wasn't so much. It's very interesting that the alien's the tie, because yes, they are similar, and I guess you could argue they're a little different, but they really are the same alien. You can certainly see the inspiration from Close Encounters design, but there's more contrast than similarities. So, the aliens, when they're associated with this film, prior to seeing them, they're associated with light and with heat. Richard Dreyfuss' character Roy, he gets sunburned when he sees the ship. When the little boy gets abducted, there's that hot orange light outside. It looks like an inferno's outside his house when he's being ripped away and everything else. If you think about that, they're in a desert, and it's heat, and it's light, and people getting sunburned. Versus Kamino, the aliens are in this rain-drenched ocean planet, and when you go inside their city, it's all cold and white, and especially the clone lab is very sterile and blue and cold. So I thought that was interesting, because it's that common design, but there's a take on the environment. The other thing, and these are kind of random thoughts, so forgive me for being kind of scatterbrained. I also found there's a theme of misplaced things. Like in Close Encounters, you find the ship in the desert. and the planes pop up in another country that were lost off the coast, the Bermuda Triangle. And you said that's a true story?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I don't remember the details, but I remember reading about that squadron going missing under very weird circumstances.
So there's these misplaced things in Close Encounters, and the big thing is with Attack of the Clones is Anakin constantly losing his lightsaber. And there's a whole speech about Obi-Wan, like, don't lose it, take care of it, this weapon's your life, and all that. And also, Anakin not being where he's supposed to be. When he's watching Padme by Simon of the Council, Obi-Wan's very specific, like, go to Naboo, follow the Council's instructions. And here Anakin runs off to his home planet on Tatooine. The other big thing besides Alien, which kind of struck me, was the whole scene, the scenes in the desert. So in Close Encounters, you have all these people who have had close encounters, and they have the vision of Devil's Tower, and they're gone out. And of course, we're following Richard Dreyfuss's character Roy. And interestingly enough, his journey to Devil's Tower has a lot of biblical implications, according to some critics. Some compare him to the story of Moses going up Mount Sinai to communicate with God, or the prophet Elijah being carried away in a chariot of fire, or Lot and his wife leaving Sodom. And that Roy actually says to Melinda Dillon at one point, like, don't look back, keep going, which is what Lot said to his wife before she was turned to a pillar of salt when she looked back on the city of Sodom being destroyed. So Roy, what I found interesting was Roy goes to the desert to communicate with these aliens in a peaceful manner. I mean, he doesn't know that's what he's doing, but ultimately that's what he's doing. And in the process, he has to climb up Devil's Tower. He has to climb up this cliff-like structure to communicate peacefully with them. Again, the Star Wars version with Attack of the Clones is the direct opposite, and I'm referring to the scene where Anakin is in search of his mother. So he rides out into a desert, which is one of my favorite parts of Attack of the Clones, the sequence of him riding the speeder bike away from Lars' homestead, going out and then finding the Tusken camp. And what does he do? His journey before he encounters this alien species of the Tusken Raiders, the Sand People, is he arrives on a cliff. That's the end of his trek to find the village. He's on a cliff. So while Roy goes up in Close Encounters to a cliff to have a peaceful communication, Anakin actually descends down a cliff, finds his mother before she dies, and then brings death and destruction to the Tusken camp and slaughters the women, the children, the men, everybody in the Tusken camp, which I thought was interesting too, because around Devil's Tower you have all the slaughtered cattle, well, not slaughtered, but they gassed all the cattle and livestock in the surrounding area. So there's the appearance of death and destruction around Devil's Tower, but really it's a peaceful event and everything's fine. And it's the direct opposite in Attack of the Clones. He descends in and he brings death and destruction. And Anakin even says when he's ranting his, pissy little rant to Padme, they were animals and I slaughtered them like animals. So I thought that was interesting in contrasting the two films. And along with that, as far as the scene with the cliff, both Anakin and Roy were brought to that location, were brought to those individual cliffs by visions that were pretty much driving them mad. Roy just was obsessed, and it ruined his marriage and his family, and he went on this trek. And Anakin, of course, had these visions of his mother suffering, which brought him to the cliff and to the Tusken camp, and really is the beginning of the straying away from being a Jedi and into the Sith realm. One more thing I wanted to say about this was, and this is something I read in the Wikipedia entry as well, that supposedly when Spielberg was making Close Encounters out in the desert, every night he would, he'd shoot all day, and then at night he would watch different movies, and those movies would inspire him, and he would keep coming up with scenes and rewriting. And it was much to the dismay of the crew. And one crew even said, if you stopped watching those effing movies, we'd be on schedule. I think that's an interesting thing to note because, again, that's what digging Star Wars is all about. It's about looking at the Star Wars films and seeing what other films inspired him. And I thought in reading that, that's what filmmakers do. Whether they acknowledge it or not, they're incorporating other works. It's in the line of that there's nothing new under this tired old sun. But I know I try to always kind of sneak something in when I'm really passionate about a project. I mean, this is the whole reason I do Digging Star Wars. But I thought that was an interesting process. And I wanted to ask you, do you do that? Do you watch other stuff that may be in the same vein of what you're working on? Or do you watch stuff that's by happenstance?
At this point, I probably don't go back and dissect scenes or frames that much. I figure it's all in there somewhere. In my collective experiences, it'll probably come out to some degree. But no, I don't really dissect stuff as much anymore as I probably should. And I say should because, it's always a good time to go back and revisit your influences and kind of see how things were done.
I think I had said this in an earlier episode of Digging Star Wars. One of my favorite quotes about George Lucas is from Carrie Fisher. And Carrie Fisher said that he was so steeped in film history from Kurosawa to 50s B-movies and the like, and he adds things, and it makes sense. What we're talking about here, I don't think Lucas, when he was making the Jawas, said, I want something that looks like the Munchkins and Wizard of Oz. I think to him, it just made sense, and he added it. Now, there's certainly some things that are a direct nod to other films. You know, there's characters on the skiff in Return of the Jedi that are called Barada and Nikto, and that's the direct reference to the day the Earth stood still. So there's fun things like that, like Commander Cody and all those types of references to other science fiction films of the serial age. But then there's things that just happen. I don't get offended when someone sees a work that I want, whether I'm working for a client or it's just a personal little pet project, and you go, oh, that's just like this film. Or oh, that music that you like, well, it sounds a lot like Coldplay. Not that I'm a Coldplay fan, but I'm like, oh, yeah, that's probably, I have some association with this music, goes with this type of feeling, and that's why I put it in whatever I'm working on. You agree?
I do. You know, it's funny, you mentioned the Wikipedia article about how sluggish the production was. I remember reading an interview with him talking about he wanted to work at the speed he was thinking. I think it was Saving Private Ryan. So, a totally different mindset back then.
I think it comes back to him working with Lucas on the Indiana Jones films. I believe all the Indiana Jones films came in under budget and ahead of schedule. And it became a tradition. And I think that's Lucas. I think Lucas is very efficient. He wants to get things done quickly. And many would argue to the point of the quality of dialogue in the film or the directing, but Lucas knows how to make a movie quickly and get it out the door, and it makes tons of money. Close Encounters is the production followed Jaws. And Jaws, for Spielberg in particular, was a horrible production. He was very displeased with how that production went. They had problems with the shark. He didn't like shooting on location in Nantucket and everything else. He wanted to shoot Close Encounters entirely on a soundstage, but how do you do that with a script that has the Devil's Tower in the landscape? Like, you have to shoot that on location. So I think it's interesting that by the time you get to a point in his career where he's doing Saving Private Ryan, he wants to work at the speed of light. So I just want to go through what I talked about real quickly here, and just tell me your thoughts. Aliens design for the Aliens, Close Encounters, and Attack Clones, you agree they're the same, correct?
I would agree.
Okay, great. The themes of the Aliens having, in Close Encounters, it's all light and heat, versus the Clones, it's kind of like he took a spin on it. It's all cold and blue. Do you agree or disagree?
Well, I agree, but I mean, again, we're talking about contrast, right?
Yeah, it's just an interesting note, I think. But you see it. You see what I'm talking about.
Yeah, sure. And also that alien speaks perfect English, by the way.
Yeah. Basic, or in Star Wars world they call that basic, but yeah, you're right, it's English. You know, it's something I didn't even think about this till just right now. You talked about how all the people on that ship in Close Encounters got experimented on, and yet when you go inside the Camino city there's all these people in test tubes. They're running a clone factory, and it's a huge lab. So these people play with life. These aliens play with life. Do you see that similarity?
It's the future.
Yeah, it's kind of creepy. The other big thing, the misplaced items, is that a stretch? Because I felt like it's kind of a stretch, but it's something that I found in both films. The fact that Anakin keeps misplacing his lightsaber, or he's out of place, and then we find these planes and ships out of place in Close Encounters.
Well, it could be a stretch. I mean, when I saw that, I knew all that was based on historical events. So
finding them in the desert is the Spielberg twist.
Yeah, you're right. I just forgot that was even in Attack of the Clones.
Lost his lightsaber, and it was all
sorry.
Okay, fair enough. And then, all right, so let's get to my favorite thing that I found is the cliff reference. Do you agree that the cliff serves as two different purposes? For Roy, it's him going up the cliff for peace, and for Anakin, it's him descending down the cliff for death and destruction of an alien species?
Sure. I mean, you brought it up in a way that I never thought about, but
yeah. I mean, I know that they said when they did that scene, it was more of a John Ford thing. Like, John Ford always had a character come in off the range, look down at the village, and then go in. It's just coincidence that these two films have that type of thing. Was there anything else that you wanted to say about Attack of the Clones that we didn't get to talk about? Anything? Now, let me ask you this. As far as, out of the 6 Star Wars films, where does Attack of the Clones rank as far as whether you like it or not? Is it your number 1, or is it number 6 out of the 6?
Do you have anything lower than 6?
Oh, let me is it your least favorite prequel?
No, because I mean, there's a great memory for me attached to that. Seeing it in New York City with you, digitally projected, that was great.
digitally projected. That was awesome.
All the prequels, as a whole, I mean, it's just the way the action's done. I just feel like I'm watching a cartoon.
You're not the only one to say that.
It's also, I'm scarred by having to watch the acting of Hayden Christensen. That was the first time I saw that. So,
did you ever see Life as a House?
Yeah.
Did you not like him?
No.
Really? Because I feel like he's acting in that movie.
Well, I think that's the problem. You shouldn't feel like he's acting. But, I really don't want to bash those movies because, a lot of people like the prequels, and it's just not my bag.
No, it's fine. No, it's fine.
Also, it's like, it seems like the way the action is done in all those prequels, I just can't get into it. It just seems too cartoony for me.
Is it the pacing of it?
Maybe.
Because I know, episode 1 moves slower, but I think it's meant to move slower for a younger audience.
I just have an appreciation for the old school action, using real stuntmen. I mean, like the action, the Road Warrior, that's it for me. Too much CG just detaches me from the whole experience.
Right. Well, and it's funny, too, is that there's a part of Attack of the Clones that is similar to Close Encounters in that both involve a mystery. Roy's got to figure out what's going on in his head with the Devil Tower visions, and of course that's the backbone of the film. And then the side story, not side story, but one of the stories in Attack of the Clones is Obi-Wan figuring out who's trying to assassinate Padme and why, and that leads him to, ironically, it leads him to the aliens. It leads him to Kamino, and where Jango Fett lives and everything else. So it's kind of interesting that both films have that mystery tied to that alien. Attack of the Clones has a film noir feel in that backstreets dealing with shady characters in diners and Obi-Wan trying to solve the mystery. And I thought that was actually pretty cool, Attack of the Clones. Did you like that part of it? That there was sort of a detective story involved?
Well, yeah, sure. I just felt like I wasn't part of that detective story. It seemed very obvious who was up to no good. Whereas Close Encounters, I felt like I'm in this journey trying to figure it out, the puzzle myself.
Okay, great. Well, I just want to thank you again for being... You're laughing, but it was a lot of fun doing this.
I wish I could say something more positive about Attack of the Clones, because, a lot of people like those movies.
I think what you said already about us going to Empire in New York and seeing... That was the first film I saw digitally projected. I think it was the first film you saw digitally projected. So it's kind of hard to hang the significance of a film on a technical thing like that. But it was pretty cool. Okay, well, first of all, I want to thank you very much for not only being my guest, but allowing us to record in your studio here in Los Angeles and running the board and everything. I really appreciate that, so thank you very much.
Absolutely. I have a appreciation what you're doing here, analyzing these films in such a creative way, so I was glad to be a part of it. So come back again, and music courtesy of W. Scott Prestwood.
Okay. So thank you for all the music, and I want to thank everyone for listening. Please come back next month. We have on our plate for next month, hopefully we can get a copy of it, 1928 Nosferatu, and its connection to Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. So I hope you come back for that. And I also want to thank everyone who posted comments one way or another for my last episode. It was very helpful and very insightful. I am sharing your frustrations with Blogger and trying to post comments. I'm fully aware of that. Believe me, listening is what's most important. So if you can listen to these episodes, that's great. And as always, if you want to add a comment and can get through on our website, great. If you want to email me at diggingstarwars@gmail.com, that's great. You can also find us on YouTube and Facebook. So once again, thank you very much, and looking forward to joining you guys next month for another episode. Thanks again, Scott.
Digging Star Wars is produced by Mitch Media and has no connection to Lucasfilm Limited whatsoever. Copyrights for films, trademark characters, and related materials discussed in Digging Star Wars remain with their respective owners. For a list of references or source material, please send an email to diggingstarwars@gmail.com.